Vhembe district again worst affected. The IEC says more than 1.2 million people visited voting stations yesterday. Joining us in the studio is the vice-chairperson of the IEC, Mr. Tselane. Good evening, Mr. Tselane. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Now, the registration weekend is done and dusted. Are you satisfied with the numbers?
We are very, very happy with the number of people who've gone through this registration weekend. And we are hoping that by the end of this, we would actually have even more greater numbers. Remember that when we started with this process, we had set ourselves a target of about 1 million people. And in the last registration, we had just under 700 new registration. And by yesterday, with 72% of the registration stations having been uploaded, we had 216,000 new registration. So we think that we are not only going to achieve our objective and target, but we will indeed be able to exceed.
Now, something I'd like to touch on are these hotspots where there were incidents of disruptions at the voter stations. How are you going to ensure that people will be able to exercise their right to vote?
There are two things. Remember that this new registration is happening within the context of a voters' roll that was developed over many years. So it is not as though we are starting from afresh. There are people who are already registered in those areas. And then we are satisfied that there are people who have gone through that particular process already. So we were going there hoping to get new registrations throughout the whole country. But that being said, because we recognize the fact that those individuals were not able to go through, those who had not registered before, were not able to go through this process, we would have to find a way of making sure that we give them more opportunities. But the good thing is, the registration that has happened does not necessarily mean that we close the voters' roll. The proclamation of the election date has not happened as yet, and then upon the proclamation, the CEO will then certify the voters' roll, and it is at that stage that we now can no longer be able to accommodate new people who will be able to participate in this process. But for now, our offices are open, and those individuals who are not able to register can still go to our offices and register.
Now, the issue of verification is still a thorny one, with potential voters still not clear on what to do. How do you plan to deal with that? We had the issue of addresses, for example. We saw a clip earlier and even yesterday of someone saying that, well, they'd used an address from a local shop in their area. How exactly does that work?
Remember on the 30th of November last year, 2015, the Constitutional Court instructed the Commission to either use the addresses, and in areas where there are not addresses, the Constitutional Court instructed us to use what the Constitutional Court refers to as sufficient particularities. So essentially what it means is that we've got to find sufficient information in order for us to be able to locate a person within the correct voting district. So immediately after the Constitutional Court judgment of the 30th of November 2015, we developed a new program and introduced a new form. We call it REC AS form, which is basically an affirmation statement. And this affirmation statement, for those people who do not have addresses, it's almost a story where a person indicates exactly where they're located so that our officials can be able to locate them within the correct voting district. If, for instance, you say to me, I'm staying about 1 kilometer away from a Jojo tank on the south of this area, then our officials will be able to say to you, you are located in this voting district or not. So it is the innovation that we introduced following the Constitutional Court judgment. But having said that, we have, remember, taken this matter for clarification also to the Constitutional Court.
Yes. So
we're going to the Constitutional Court and saying, we want certain things to be clarified in relation to this. Does it mean, for instance, if you have a voters' roll that has got 3 or 4 names of people who do not have addresses, does that nullify that segment of the voters' roll? Or does it mean that we've got to remove those people on the voters' roll, even if we think that they are located within that voting district, but we do not have sufficient information to be able to indicate on the voters' roll? Because we can't just sit in the offices and begin to punch in information and indicating where you are located. You've got to consent and give us that information. So that is the next step that we're going to have to look into following this weekend registration to make sure that all the people that are there either have got addresses or sufficient particularities as instructed by the court.
Now, speaking of the Constitutional Court, the election date has been declared, but the Constitutional Court case is still pending. Will this somehow affect the timetable for the elections or not?
No. We adopted a two-pronged strategy. The first one was let's get clarity from the Constitutional Court, but at the same time, we populated and harvested addresses for all people. You may recall that during this weekend we sent SMSs to almost 5 million people, yes. Basically informing them that we may not have sufficient particularities and that they must go to the registration station where they can actually give us information about where they're located or their addresses. So we've done that, and we're going to continue to do this. We've got at least 30 days or so before the proclamation of the election date. And then this information that we're going to go to our people on with will assist us in terms of making sure that we are able to rectify all the areas where we think that there may still be some difficulties. And then we'll deal with these issues. We'll go to court, and the court will make its own judgment. But at the same time, we're not just sitting on our laurels. We are making sure that we're populating the voters' roll with proper information.
Mr. Tselane, we're running out of time, but just one question. Are young people registering to vote? Because I know they were the ones that you were trying to target, especially with these voter registration weekends. You're correct. I mean, in terms of our messaging, particularly since the last registration, we are focusing more on young people. And we are so happy that the last registration, we had almost 70% of people of new registration coming from the categories of the people that we were talking about, the youth, essentially. So we are hoping that, again, with this registration, we'll get even more higher numbers coming from the category of the youth. Mr. Tselane, thank you very much for joining us. That was the Vice Chairperson of the IEC, Mr. Terry Tselane. We'll have more news for you after the break. Stay with us.